so I'm here with Dru Brown from Island Time, and we're here to talk about the short-term rental market. It's such a critical part of our real estate industry. And you've been at this for over 20 years, and I know Island Time, what you've been 4 years in practice so far, that as an owner of that great new organization. And, you know, the thing I always think about with real estate in our area, and it's not specific, but it's pretty special, that is able to compel and allow people to buy real estate here as a vacation home or an investment property, is to offset some of those carrying costs that, you know, they tend to inch up a little bit, and with rental income. Right. And you know, you and I have been here for a long time, right? So we go back and we think about early part of the time you were in the industry about what rental rates look like and rental catalogs and my goodness, we've come such a long way. And just kind of wanted to have an opportunity to sit down with you and just talk about, you know, we're here at the start of 2024. What happened in 2023? Kind of the why a little bit about maybe it was a little bit off. What do we see in 2024 moving forward? Obviously, everybody kind of wants to get a sense of that. You've got your finger on that pulse. And maybe some other dynamic aspects about what's kind of going on in your industry, and also what people can be doing at their properties to make it rentable or make it something a little bit more manageable, et cetera. So we just kind of want to sit down and chat with you.
That's great, and thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it to be able to talk to you.
Listen, Dru, you're not only such a nice guy and you've got such great experience, but the reality is I've been super impressed by your knowing the numbers. Like you're kind of a data nerd, right? Like you really go after
self-proclaimed data geek,
studying all that. And I'm not sure that everybody is attuned to that. As an owner, I think a lot of times they're just like, hey, show me the money. You know, like what did it do? But it takes a process of really understanding the dynamics of how the market is shifting, how the industry is shifting, how renter behavior is shifting. And of course, COVID, you know, created a whole new, changed everything. So let's, we're certainly past COVID, but we're in the wake of some of that stuff. So let's talk about, let's just look at 2023. Like, how was 2023? How did it kind of marry up with expectations? And what do you figure kind of were the main steering factors for how it ended up?
Yeah, so with 2023, I think probably the biggest thing was, you know, there was a realization that there was going to be a change from the COVID years, which we really probably didn't necessarily prepare for, because who could have prepared for it?
Right. And when you say realization change, meaning those were peak, like top years. So this was a settling down a little bit.
That's correct.
But you weren't sure when it would show up.
So as we talked about, a little bit of a readjustment, you know. So what it was you had such a difference in the amount of time that people could travel here and what was available. So 2023 was a change for our destination to understand, okay, demand is there, but the demand looked different. So it was a mix of looking at a lot of the traditional timeframes that book your spring breaks and then all the times through the summer and even early part of the fall, with still some holdover mix of people doing some business trips and or monthly stays. So you did get a little bit of the benefit of that, but you did not get the full array of that you had during COVID.
Basically, everything was on the table during COVID, from snowbirds to people being here for vacation all the way into October. Things that we really, even previous to COVID, had really never seen.
That absolutely had never seen. You know, the level of people that were here for extended stays, the island had never seen before. Which, you know, again, had caused some other things, which we'll get into later. But, you know, I think we're in a position where 2023, from a rental perspective, occupancy-wise, was a good year. Rental rates were definitely something that were very different. You know, when we always talk about in our world being able to command versus demand. And so, you know, during COVID, we were able to command any rental rate that we wanted and able to obtain the occupancy that we wanted. And this year, it was more so using the data collected for that and then using pre-pandemic numbers and occupancy and trying to really marry that into what is a successful strategy for renting the property as optimally as possible without increasing wear and tear, and also, you know, to the owner's needs.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think, I look back, I'm not diving into the data like you are, okay? So I look at it more experientially, like what were the stories we heard? I know, and I'm just looking at the Facebook feed, it sure seemed like last year, everybody's like, I'm going to Europe, or I'm on a cruise. And it was like, what was old is new again because now we were past COVID and people could do that kind of travel, and maybe they were kind of that pent-up demand to kind of go do something different.
Absolutely. So 2023 was the first full year that the world was open.
Right.
So 2022, we had a lot of situations where our country was open, and thankfully for us, the state of South Carolina was open.
Yes, sir.
2023, we saw an increase of over 70% increase in cruise travel.
Of course.
So people that wanted to get out, get a destination, have a lot of things included with it, excursions, food, drinks, big heavy aspect of that. The other aspect that was very big was an over 30% increase in international travel.
Yeah.
So again, when you're talking about our market, of course there's going to be impact here. There's 100% delta between just those two industries versus what we had seen in the year past.
Yeah, for sure. So you, in hindsight, you could say, "Oh, I kind of saw that coming,"
yes.
But you're not really sure until you've sort of it's in the rearview mirror. And for those of us that live locally and you've been here long enough, we have this kind of like build up kind of component, which like I got to get off the rock. We call it. I got to just go do something a little bit different, and it feels like maybe a certain percentage of your standard base of renters felt like they needed to get off the rock. It just they needed to get out of the country and kind of go do something different. Okay.
Absolutely.
You were talking, Lou, about rates and the changes there, and this fascinates me. And I know we've talked a little bit about this,
yes.
but it seemed like the airline industry was sort of early on with this about there being no real static price. I think we've all seen this. Like you go on, there's no real static price on what a seat would cost. It started depending on what did you book it 2 weeks in advance or 2 months in advance. And now it starts seeming like it's kind of to the consumer, unless you really know the algorithm, what's happening, you don't exactly know what's happening. That's kind of morphed into your industry, hasn't it?
It absolutely has. A lot of that early adoption was happening, say 3, 4, 5 years ago. But as we were talking previously, probably now here on Island, roughly 75% of the managers use what's called dynamic pricing. Okay. So it is exactly that. It is a system and an algorithm based on the value of a day, the value of a season, and the value of the portion that it falls within that year.
Sure.
So you start with the base price, and then from there are always variables that fluctuated. So the occupancy of a property will depend, could increase the revenue there. Or if you're in a situation where the island-wide occupancy is down, the system will also automatically update to bring down prices, which is what we saw in 2020.
And you've got your finger on that pulse more because the data that's being thrown into this system.
That's correct.
So it's good data in, and then your seat, you can help guide an owner through this algorithm and this dynamic pricing to say, listen, guys, trending's looking good. Let's be calm. Let's go to book. Or things are shifting a little bit. We need to make some changes.
100%.
And you can make those changes quickly, instantly.
Right. And to your point, probably the biggest aspect now, which we did not have as an industry previously, is we can make those changes individually and at any time. So again, as owners' needs and wants change or conditions in the market change, or as we identify things, we can make those changes instantly, and then they're going out to marketplace.
It's really no different than what we do in our world. You've got a product that maybe isn't moving as timely as an owner would like it to, or maybe the market response is suggesting that maybe it's a little bit price heavy. And so you can make that change instantly, and then all of a sudden the world hears about it, sees it, and that might make a change. That's a lot different than when I started in this business and we had a printed MLS book once a month. It's sort of like in your world, it was almost worse because it seemed like you guys had a printed rental catalog for a year.
We did.
And so you'd have to make it like, okay, we're going to print it. What's the rate?
Well, and not only that, you had to have that out and ready in September, October of the year prior.
Right.
So, making sure, and you had very limited access. You had one photo, and maybe 100-word description. So, again, from the last 15, 20 years, it is a huge difference. The internet has made a huge impact on our business, but dynamic pricing has, because again, we can effectively pinpoint a property and then base a strategy on, again, occupancy, demand, levels in the actual community.
And you can be nimble with it, right?
Correct.
So you and your property owner are achieving the best goal that you can. All right, so that's tech, and I know you love about that. We could go way deep on that, but let's keep it at that, and then let's look at the other side of tech, which is what's tech look like at the houses or the properties? Has there been everybody seems like is all about Ring doorbells and cameras,
yes.
and I'm sure there's rules and guidelines about whether you should and you can't, and all that sort of stuff. But
yes.
but let's talk more about maybe some of the things where a property owner could have appropriate awareness of what's happening at their home and or controls about what's happening in their home. Is there new kind of technology that you guys
there are,
deploying?
and it's even there's technology being piloted in our community. So there are noise monitoring devices, so both internally and externally, so that you have the ability to get a feedback and an alert when it would hit a certain level at a certain time, so that you can stay in compliance with different regulations and ordinances or community guidelines. So that's really been a great feature. And then I think probably the other big feature is some of the automation you can do in things like pool equipment. So you have the ability to remotely monitor your pool equipment, turn it on and off. So enabling spa and pool heat. Okay. Or also knowing pool levels, propane tank levels. Again, those aspects in terms of the amount of time it can take logistically really make it a fruitful.
You're a homeowner 1,000 miles away, and you're able to kind of pull this data up and have just a much better understanding of what's happening. It does feel like property owners have that desire to be more intimately involved. Not all, but sort of, I think the world of technology has brought us in closer contact with our real estate that way through those other things. So all right, let's touch base on this one. So regulatory organizations, let's look at the town of Hilton Head. And I sat down with the mayor and talked to him about their new program of the requirement to have a short-term rental business license, short-term rental permit. It seemed like last year, 23, was really sort of the first full year
rollout.
He indicated to me that, and we've got this on our other video, that it sounded like they got to a count. They had basically no count prior to that of how many short-term rental units are in the town limits. It sounds like that count got to be about 7,200. But would you agree with him that that's probably not the total, right? Not everybody has chimed in on that.
No. I think especially too when you take into account the different levels of property sales and some people converting properties that were residential to a rental versus vice versa. I think there's always going to be some data degradation there, but again, that was the number that we had pretty much said would be where we would start. Okay. So there could be more, there could be less. But again, I think there's a lot of aspects with that. As we were talking, I think there's a lot of justification for there to be some type of a regulation or an ordinance and some compliance, so that you can see what your problems are, so that you can creatively plan for making future responses.
Well, for sure. And what we talked about is that sort of being good neighbors, and not that a rental property isn't a good neighbor, but it seems as though when you start having some guidelines, which the town now has, then you can start to identify, with that being the benchmark, whether someone's not hitting those guidelines. Right. And if there's a level of complaints coming, is there a company that tends to have more complaints than others, or is there a property that tends to have more complaints than others? So it does have the ability, and it seems like the goal, to just kind of have an assimilation of being better. Correct. Neighbors.
And to your point, that was something that was a large conversation, was the good neighbor policy, because we want there to be a clear expectation from the guest that comes into the property, but we also want there to be a clear expectation from the residents to understand, here's what, again, we don't necessarily want people going and knocking on doors, or if there's a problem, here's the proper way to go about it. Right. Not only that, the town does a good job of going out and verifying, is there really an issue? And then we'll give them the opportunity to resolve that issue.
A lot of warnings, a lot of looking into some things that didn't flesh out, others that did, some that might lead to fines, that sort of thing. You would expect that on the array. Yeah. But some of the data that I saw seemed that, generally speaking, we're a pretty well behaved kind of community, right? I mean, it's not like, I think the real issue was you probably, again, maybe had rental properties coming into what people thought were primary residential neighborhoods, and then there's a little friction there. So this is trying to solve that, which I can understand. So let's segue on that one, if you will. I was super intrigued by this, that we go back 5 years and we say, well, how many short-term rental properties are in Bluffton? Right. And we always just focus on the island, right? Yeah. But how many are in Bluffton? And the answer is, A, we don't really know, and B, I mean, I'm scratching my head trying to think about a few. But now you come through, especially with COVID and the development of Bluffton and the mainland, to support entertainment, if that's the right term, or for people to want to be compelled to come and stay there.
We would say activity, and to your point, yes. And to your point, Bluffton has completely changed. When you look at pre-COVID to looking at now through COVID, we would say as an industry, it's now a sustainable short-term vacation rental community. Yeah. There's enough activity, there's enough destination, there's enough dining options. Again, in Bluffton itself, the town of Bluffton has done a really good job of making sure to complement that. They also have their own set of rules and regulations, which, again, it's easier to be in compliance than it is to not be in compliance. So, you definitely need to make sure you're doing that. But it's really now a foundational market that especially investors and other buyers can look at.
Yeah, it's clearly not for every neighborhood. Some have restrictions. So you look at that compliance thing. Super important for anybody thinking about putting a property on the short-term rental market anywhere to start understanding what permit requirements, license requirements, if there's fees that are due, if there's restrictions, that sort of thing. Obviously, that world's gotten a little bit more complex than than maybe it used to be. And I just find that to be fascinating. I think that all of a sudden now you got Bluffton that is, I think some people that would be a head scratcher for some people.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
And yet, as each new data point, coming back to your favorite, each new property that's on the market there feeds into the data system, the algorithm, then you can start to better understand what the tolerances are of what people are willing to pay.
And fine tuning, so you can fine tune not only your pricing, but again, the good part about it is from not only the experience at the guest, but the experience of the community, you can also then fine-tune what's working for that as a rental, what's working for the community. How do you really be, again, a good, as you said, good neighbor, and make sure that it's a cohesive experience for everybody.
The one I want to hear from you in the future is that the data kind of grows is there a difference in the peak seasons, on the island versus in Bluffton, and does that attract different people at different times? So
Bluffton is definitely more so of a year-round, shorter stay market. Okay. So, where we would still see on the island traditional stays in March, April, our summer time frames of a week. The average length of stay is about 2 days shorter in Bluffton than it is on the island.
So people are not making it necessarily that one full week-long vacation, but they're coming in, getting the experience.
Correct. And the good thing to also point out to the audience is it doesn't mean a heavier volume. It's more spread out. So with all the different events and especially things, like having access to oyster season and having access to the river and the different
all
events.
The festivals.
Exactly. So it's a much more spread out, time frame. It's just when they're coming in, they're not coming in for 7 days, they're coming in for 4.
All right. So events. Yeah. The Heritage Golf Tournament has changed. It's become a top tier golf tournament. I think everybody's kind of excited about that. What's the impact now that you're looking forward into 2024 for rentals around there? Have you seen a bump in that? What does that kind of look like really quickly?
Yeah, so ever since it has been an elevated event status, not only from a guest standpoint are we seeing higher levels of occupancy, but we're also seeing more of a return of things like hospitality homes or other people that are participating in the tournament to have facilities for themselves. So it's definitely been something that we've been able to capitalize on. For the first time in history, we were able to, ink multi-year deals with some companies, which was not heard of. You think
certainly
about,
went away.
In the last 10 years, there was conversation: will we keep the tournament? Will we not? Again, with it getting elevated status, it's really brought a level of stabilization to that, which again does nothing but help our community.
Super exciting. You think so we, those of us that don't get invited to those hospitality houses, we can look and envy once again when they're packed with people and you need the wristband to get in all
we
that
just
kind of
rent
stuff.
them. We don't get
right,
invited.
I understand. All right. So that's kind of a teaser into just 2024. Like what's the new year looking like? I know that booking patterns are probably changing. It seemed like, January 1, this is the time where people are going to start booking for the summer. Is that changing? And then what's just the overall forecast? Are you looking for the
So it is, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think that was probably the biggest change that resulted from COVID was there was a huge change in booking patterns that carried over into 2023, and then we're seeing actually kind of an amalgamation of that again in 2024.
Okay.
So you're seeing shorter time frames, so for like right now, it is a time frame that traditional people to Hilton Head, they'll book for summer. That is happening. But you're also going to then see there's a big focus on the spring time frame because we're within 90 days of arrival. So, but what I would say overall is I would expect at least a near level of occupancy for 2024 in 2023.
Last year.
And I would expect from what we're seeing so far in all of the data, at least a 4 to 6% increase in
no, that's encouraging, right?
Yeah.
There's no reason it shouldn't be, and I think we're not going to be able to poll everybody as they come across the bridge, right? You know, like, hey, last year did you go on a cruise or international trip? But you got to. My common sense tells me those are super expensive vacations.
Yes.
And people probably are not geared up to do that year upon year upon year.
Totally agree with you.
So they kind of check that box, scratch the itch, got off the rock.
Yeah.
Now they're back.
We've been to Europe. We've been to the Caribbean. Now we can. Yeah.
Now we're coming back to the
we're going back to Hilton Head.
Yeah, I love it. All right, Dru. Listen, this has been amazing. Really appreciate your expertise. You're having your finger on the pulse and on that leading edge. And hopefully this has really been insightful for everybody watching.